Today, a potentially massive shakeup inside the U.S. military. New reporting reveals plans to consolidate combatant commands, reduce the number of generals, and rethink how America projects power around the world. It's more than a reorganization. It signals a deeper shift in priorities, authorities, and the future role of the U.S. military around the world. I'll have the details. New reporting from the Washington Post suggests that the Pentagon is quietly preparing for one of the most dramatic military reorganizations in decades. On the surface, it looks like an internal restructuring, a shuffle of the military bureaucracy. But taken as a whole, this plan points to something much bigger, a fundamental reassessment of how the U.S. uses military power and how much of the world it intends to manage at once. According to the reporting, senior defense officials are drafting a proposal that would downgrade or merge several of the military's major commands, reduce the number of four-star generals, and consolidate authority at the very top of the Pentagon. Commands that have long operated with a high degree of regional autonomy, particularly in Europe and Africa and the Middle East, would see their influence reduced. Now, this is not just about efficiency or cost savings. It's about control, priorities, and strategic focus. For decades, the U.S. military has been organized around a region-by-region model, with powerful commanders responsible for specific parts of the world: Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Pacific. Those four-star commanders often functioned as semi-independent power centers, deeply engaged with allies, managing crises, and shaping U.S. posture on the ground. That made sense in the post-Cold War era, when Washington saw itself as the global security manager, trying to keep multiple regions stable all at the same time. What this new plan suggests is a departure from that mindset. Instead of trying to actively manage Europe and Africa and the Middle East and beyond all at the same time, the Pentagon appears to be moving toward a more centralized model, one that limits regional autonomy and pulls decision-making back toward Washington. Fewer commands, fewer top generals, and tighter oversight. What this move says about the current administration's view or regard for its senior military leaders, well, that's a very interesting question. And notably, as global commands are downgraded or merged, the Western Hemisphere appears to be gaining renewed strategic attention. The proposal reportedly includes combining U.S. Northern Command and U.S. Southern Command into a single Americas-focused command, elevating hemispheric defense as a unified priority. For years, the Western Hemisphere has often been treated as a secondary concern in U.S. military planning, especially compared to Europe or the Indo-Pacific. This shift suggests a reassessment that the most immediate and persistent threats to U.S. security may now lie closer to home. Transnational criminal organizations, fentanyl trafficking networks, mass migration pressures, regional instability, and growing foreign influence from China, Russia, and Iran in the Americas are increasingly being framed not as law enforcement or diplomatic challenges, but as national security issues. The current actions in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific are a solid example of this shift. This reorganization fits squarely within broader thinking from the Trump administration. The emphasis is less on symbolic global presence and more on hard-nosed prioritization. Borders matter, sovereignty matters, and the current thinking seems to go, the U.S. should not indefinitely shoulder the burden of managing security across every region of the world. Under that worldview, Europe is expected to take greater responsibility for its own defense. Long-standing commitments in the Middle East are questioned. Africa is no longer treated as a theater requiring a permanent heavyweight U.S. military footprint. Instead, the focus shifts to flexibility, maintaining the ability to surge when necessary rather than maintaining expansive command structures everywhere all the time. That's the theory anyway, but there are obvious trade-offs. Critics inside the Pentagon and on Capitol Hill worry that consolidating commands could dilute regional expertise and weaken U.S. relationships with allies who rely on consistent high-level military engagement. Think about a NATO ally sitting on Russia's doorstep or a Middle Eastern partner coordinating missile defense with U.S. forces. Those relationships are built on regular high-level military engagement, constant liaison. Critics argue that consolidating commands risks weakening those key liaison relationships. And, of course, there's a potential impact on intelligence gathering. And by potential, I mean there would be an impact on intelligence gathering. These commands aren't just warfighting headquarters. They're major intelligence hubs, integrating military intelligence, signals collection, and partner nation reporting into a continuous regional picture. But whether this proposal moves forward in its current form or not, the signal is clear. The U.S. is rethinking how much of the world it tries to manage simultaneously and how much authority it gives military leaders to do it. Now that's a major recalibration. If this plan is ultimately implemented, this would mark a significant evolution in America's military posture, one that reflects a changing view of where U.S. interests begin, where they end, and how much the country is willing to commit to maintaining order far from home. All right, coming up next, Vladimir Putin once again rejects compromise on occupied Ukrainian territory, and Beijing tightens control over Hong Kong following the conviction of pro-democracy figure Jimmy Lai. I'll be right back. Hey, Mike Baker here. Now, I suspect you know this, but we are smack dab in the middle of the holiday season. And for many families, of course, that means excitement, but perhaps a little stress. Seriously, between gifts and travel and just generally higher prices, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, especially if you're already relying on credit cards to cover the basics. If that debt is piling up, well, let me tell you something. You're not alone. Now, maybe you're a homeowner and you've already considered reaching out to our friends at American Financing, but you hesitated because you don't want to give up your low mortgage interest rate. That's why American Financing created what they call the Smart Equity Loan. It's a simple, smart way to get your finances back on track without giving up your low mortgage rate. Unlike a HELOC, which can fluctuate with the market, the Smart Equity Loan offers a fixed rate, so you'll have one predictable monthly payment. It lets you use your home's equity to pay off high-interest debt, free up your cash flow, and still keep your existing mortgage intact. There are no upfront fees, and that's very important. So to find out if you qualify, simply call 866-885-1881. Again, that number is 866-885-1881. Or just visit americanfinancing.net/PDB. Welcome back to the PDB. Well, this may come as a shock to almost no one, but Russian President Putin is showing no signs of backing off of his long-standing maximalist demands, making clear that the Kremlin will not hand back any part of the Ukrainian territories that it currently occupies or hopes to occupy. Now, I don't know who could have seen that coming. Who could have possibly read those tea leaves? Russia's deputy foreign minister says Moscow will refuse any compromise and intends to retain control of 5 Ukrainian regions, these being Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Now, aside from annexed Crimea and most of Luhansk, Russian forces don't fully control any of the other regions they're claiming, nor do they hold the regional capitals of Zaporizhia or Kherson. But that hardline has been echoed across the Kremlin as diplomatic talks between the U.S. and Kyiv have soldiered on. As European leaders reiterate long-term security commitments to Kyiv, Moscow responded by demanding security guarantees of its own. What? Making clear it sees no reason to soften its position simply because talks between the U.S. and Ukraine continue. Kremlin mouthpiece Dmitry Peskov underscored that stance, warning Russia would not tolerate a scenario in which, as he put it, quote, Kyiv signs peace agreements, then begins to sabotage them. Clearly, the invading country has a total of zero self-awareness. To be fair, though, introspection and self-awareness have never been trademarks of a communist regime. In the same breath, Peskov repeated a familiar set of false claims, including the allegation that a NATO representative had, quote, infiltrated the Ukrainian government and somehow triggered the war. Peskov then removed his tinfoil hat and stepped away from the podium. Still, that refusal to bend extended to a proposed Christmas truce. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz suggested that Russia pause its attacks over the holiday as a possible opening toward broader negotiations. Ukraine agreed, with President Zelensky saying Kyiv would support a temporary halt, but Moscow dismissed that idea outright. Despite this, Peskov maintains that Russia does want peace. Oh, definitely. but not a truce that would give Ukraine what he called a, quote, breathing space to prepare for continued fighting. The Kremlin also is clearly lacking a sense of irony. Instead, he said, the Kremlin intends to, quote, achieve our goals and secure our interests, signaling that Ukraine should brace for continued strikes on energy and other civilian infrastructure through Christmas. All of this unfolds as U.S. and Ukrainian negotiators wrapped up an intense round of talks in Berlin. Discussions this week focused on the latest iteration of a 20-point peace framework drafted by President Trump's envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Zelensky described those meetings as marking, quote, significant progress, noting they were the first time that he had held direct talks with Trump's team. According to the Ukrainian president, American negotiators have now heard Kyiv and Europe's core positions and are preparing to take them back to Moscow. Zelensky said he expects to finalize his portion of the negotiation framework very soon, after which the U.S. will consult with Russia, brief President Trump directly, and potentially host another round of Ukraine talks this weekend. But still, the Kremlin continues to insist that no settlement is possible until Ukraine abandons its NATO aspirations. Apparently, they haven't heard that they already offered to. That's a step that Kyiv has already indicated it's willing to take, as long as it receives written, specific security guarantees from the West and an assurance from Moscow of no future invasions. I'm sure that assurance would be rock solid. Russia is also demanding acceptance of its so-called root causes narrative, such as alleged discrimination against ethnic Russians, amnesty for its soldiers, and other claims built on premises that Russia has used to justify its 2022 invasion. Shifting now to Hong Kong, a case that's lingered since the mass 2019 pro-democracy protests over Beijing's growing influence came to a close, with the city's National Security Court, controlled, of course, by the Chinese Communist Party, convicting media tycoon and activist Jimmy Lai on all charges. Shocking. Such a surprise. The decision followed an unusually long and internationally watched process. The court's 855-page verdict, 855 pages? Was handed down more than 5 years after Lai was first arrested back in 2020 and read aloud to a packed courtroom. To understand how the case reached this point, if you will, allow me to rewind a bit. Lai has long been one of the most outspoken figures in Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement. He's a self-made businessman who founded Apple Daily, which, for those of you unfamiliar, is a fiercely anti-Chinese Communist Party tabloid that openly backed the 2019 protests. As a result of his CCP criticisms, Beijing claimed Lai played a key role in orchestrating those protests. That's a charge that his supporters reject. That visibility made him an obvious target when Beijing imposed its sweeping national security law back in 2020, turning legal dissent into criminal conduct almost overnight. On Monday, the judge found Lai guilty on 2 counts of colluding with foreign forces, pointing to his efforts to meet with foreign officials, including American leaders, and his advocacy for Chinese sanctions. He was also convicted of sedition under a colonial-era law, which is a statute that had largely faded from use but has been revived as Beijing expands its grip over Hong Kong. Reaction to the ruling was deeply critical, which, of course, will have no impact on the Chinese regime. Human rights groups, press freedom advocates, and pro-democracy organizations described the verdict as another serious blow to what remains of Hong Kong's civil liberties. Governments across Europe and Asia echoed those concerns, with both Taiwan and the UK calling directly for Lai's release. British Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper condemned his conviction as, quote, politically motivated persecution, end quote. Well, congratulations, Yvette. You're today's PDB Statement of the Obvious Award winner. Meanwhile, the Committee of Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation, in an effort to challenge Yvette for the Statement of the Obvious Award, said that the ruling shows that the territory's courts, quote, have been compromised and politicized in the past 5 years, end quote. Of course, Beijing welcomed the outcome. Really? China's Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office praised the verdict, branding Lai a, quote, lackey of external forces and accusing him of endangering national security. And so, with the verdict now in place, the consequences for Lai are grim. The 78-year-old potentially faces life in prison. His next court hearing is scheduled for the 12th of January, and his defense team has not yet said whether it will appeal. Before the verdict, Lai served 2 consecutive 14-month prison sentences on other protest-related charges. His family says he has spent more than 1,800 days in solitary confinement and that his health has declined significantly, suffering from heart palpitations and advanced diabetes amid Hong Kong's harsh prison conditions. The news of the verdict and Lai's deteriorating health prompted an effort from President Trump, who said he personally raised Lai's case with Chinese President Xi Jinping, asking him to, quote, consider his release. Trump told reporters, quote, I feel so badly. He's an older man, and he's not, well, we'll see what happens, end quote. Now, it is highly unlikely that Xi will heed Trump's request, and the commander-in-chief hasn't said exactly when he notified Xi about this. But the outreach reflects Trump's decision to raise the issue directly with Beijing, keeping pressure on a case that has come to define Hong Kong's loss of autonomy. And in today's back of the brief, fentanyl isn't just a public health crisis anymore. President Trump signs an order formally labeling illicit fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction. I'll have those details when we come back. Hey, Mike Baker here. Now let me take just a moment of your time to talk about taxes and your personal finances. I know, who doesn't love to talk about taxes and personal finances? Now, we've all seen those scary ads about owing money to the IRS, trying, of course, to frighten you into calling. But let me tell you about a different kind of company. I'm talking about tax relief advocates. Now, if you owe the IRS, whether it's $5,000 or $50,000 or $500,000, TRA, Tax Relief Advocates, has solutions to help resolve your tax problems. And the great thing is you can get help anytime simply by visiting TRA.com. TRA could reduce or even eliminate what you owe. Their team is passionate about helping individuals and businesses fix IRS issues. And they have over 1,000 5-star reviews on Google and an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau. Look, you no longer need to be afraid of the IRS. Generous programs are available to give you a fresh start. End your tax nightmare today by visiting TRA.com. Again, that's TRA.com. Tax Relief Advocates. Real solutions for real people. In today's back of the brief, President Trump redefined the fentanyl crisis, signing an executive order that elevates illicit fentanyl and its precursor chemicals to weapons of mass destruction level national security threats. Now, I mentioned this in passing during yesterday's afternoon bulletin, but there's more here that deserves a closer look. Speaking from the Oval Office Monday, Trump framed the move as a response to what he described as the sheer scale of destruction that fentanyl has inflicted on the U.S. He said, quote, with this historic executive order, we are formally classifying fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction because that's what it is. The order lays out why the administration believes that the label fits. Illicit fentanyl, it argues, is, quote, closer to a chemical weapon than a narcotic, noting that as little as 2 milligrams, which is an almost undetectable trace amount, equivalent to maybe a few grains of table salt, can be lethal. The drug has a level of potency that pushes it far beyond the boundaries of traditional enforcement or public health responses. That danger, the order says, has played out in tragic numbers. Trump summed it up this way, quote, no bomb does what this is doing. We're losing 200,000 to 300,000 people every year that we know of, end quote. The administration warns the drug could be weaponized in, quote, concentrated large-scale terror attacks by hostile actors, a reason for invoking authorities typically reserved for nuclear or biological and chemical threats. Beyond the death toll that has unfortunately touched so many Americans, the order frames fentanyl trafficking as a broader national security threat tied to cartel violence. It says the dominant cartels supplying fentanyl to the U.S. fuel, quote, lawlessness across the Western Hemisphere, finance assassinations and insurgencies, and engage in armed conflict over territory, the violence that extends well beyond the drug trade itself. To confront that threat, the executive order outlines a massive interagency response. It directs the Justice Department to immediately intensify criminal investigations and prosecutions, orders the State and Treasury Departments to impose sanctions and financial penalties on traffickers, and tasks the Departments of War and Justice with determining whether military resources should support enforcement efforts. The Pentagon and the Department of Homeland Security are also instructed to update domestic chemical incident response plans to account for fentanyl, while DHS is tasked with using WMD-related intelligence to identify smuggling networks. And so, the WMD designation is designed to unlock more aggressive investigations, tighter coordination across federal agencies, and increase international pressure on cartels and their financial backers. Trump's move marks a historic escalation of the federal government's response to what is now the fentanyl national security crisis. And that, my friends, is the President's Daily Brief for Wednesday, the 17th of December. Now, if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. Also, if you get a free moment in your busy day, please check out and hopefully subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's at President's Daily Brief. As YouTube channels go, it's got what the kids nowadays call aura. I think that's it. Or maybe they say it's fire or dope. Regardless, it does pass the vibe check. I'm Mike Baker, and I'll be back later today with the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, a really positive, nice, and kind comment. That would be appreciated. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily updates.